Chapter 26. 1 month before she was to leave for Rhiannon, Kessa was in the kitchen, preparing a pot of porridge, when Equestria entered. Putting her hair up in a braided bun and sticking a hairpin through it, Lady Fane sat down at the table. "Good morning, Kessa," she said, receiving a smile in response. "What are your plans for today?" Kessa shoveled a spoonful of porridge into her mouth to justify her delay in answering. Rarely present when Equestria was, Kessa was not accustomed to speaking to her about what she was up to. It wasn't as if she could be completely honest, either. A loud, powerful knock saved her from having to answer. Equestria muttered something about who would be calling so early as she got up from the table and walked to the front door. Equally curious about who would be calling, Kessa hovered in the doorway between the foyer and the kitchen as her sister opened the door to reveal a rhinoceros of a man. Standing 6'6" and substantially muscled, he filled the entire doorframe. Kessa instantly recognized him as a guest at her sister's wedding, Bjorn Compton. "Compton!" Equestria explained in surprise. "Please, come in." She graciously gestured him into the foyer.
"I've some news,"
he stated, skipping civilities. Every bit of the man seemed to thrum with suppressed delight. It was easy to picture him bursting like a pressurized balloon if he didn't speak soon. Whatever news he had for her sister, Kessa definitely wanted to hear it too. Noticing Kessa leaning against the doorway, spooning porridge into her mouth, and trying to conceal her own anticipation for his news, Compton was sidetracked. His entire demeanor changed as he eyed her with a keenness she wasn't accustomed to. He bowed his head, faint traces of a smile appearing as he said, "Good morning, Miss Decora." The moment she'd seen him, Kessa had pegged him as a no-nonsense, stringent sort of man. His singling her out with a courteous greeting and a none too discreet ogle caught her off guard, especially under the circumstances which brought him. Blushing, Kessa acknowledged him with a nod and a fleeting smile. Anxious to hear his news and unable to bear the pause created by the awkward exchange between Compton and her sister, Equestria prodded, "Well, Compton?"
"In 2 months, Captain York will select 3 members of our unit to join the Uriat," Compton announced. "We were informed earlier this morning at the barracks. Since you weren't there, I thought I'd come tell you personally."
Attempting unsuccessfully to contain her own excitement, an excitement that was now analogous with Compton's, Equestria flashed her pearly whites and said, "That was very good of you, Compton. I appreciate it. This totally alters how I'd planned to spend my day. Are you heading back to the yard?"
"Yes. Shall I wait for you by the stables?"
"I'll be out shortly," Equestria assured him with a decisive nod. Once he'd shut the door and taken a couple steps toward the stables, Equestria rounded on her sister exuberantly. "Great Athalosakara, Kessa! I've dreamed of this since I was a child." Untouched by her sister's enthusiasm, Kessa took the news with a grain of salt. "You've only been a city guard for a couple years. Will they promote you to a position of such distinction so soon?" Equestria was far too excited to let her little sister's reasoning affect her. Experience is important, true, but hard work and determination can trump that. "As you've demonstrated time and again," Malleus said, walking in the front door, "both here and in Aquina." "Really?" Kessa licked the porridge off her spoon. "And we're sure nepotism had nothing to do with it." Equestria slapped Kessa on the arm hard enough to make her drop her spoon into the bowl with a loud clunk. "I think you're mixing cynicism with jealousy, sis." Picking up her spoon again, Kessa smiled coolly. "Perhaps my cynicism is misplaced. If there's anyone who can beat the odds, Equestria, it's you. She scooped the last morsel of porridge into her mouth and swallowed. It's always been you. After licking the remnants of the last bits of porridge off it, Kessa let the spoon land in the bowl with another clunk, spun on her heel, and went back into the kitchen. She stood at the wash basin, holding her bowl as her gut swirled with emotion. Pumping some water out, she washed the dish and put it in the rack to dry. She knew she'd behaved poorly. Pantheus wasn't here to censure her, so her gut was filling in. True, she felt resentment toward her sister. Everything always seemed to go her way, and so smoothly, too. But when push came to shove, Kessa was truly proud of all her sister had accomplished. Perhaps, as Thomas had frequently counseled her, she really needed to keep her mouth shut until her emotions were in check. At least, that way, she'd have less to feel ashamed about. From the next room, she heard the dungeon keeper reminding her sister that Compton was waiting. Equestria's reply sounded stressed. I've so little time to prepare, Melius. Maybe my sister's right. It's too soon.
If you continue to stand here doing nothing but doubting yourself, she will be. Go. Prove the skeptics wrong.
Kessa heard Equestria give a peculiar chuckle, which tempted her to peek into the foyer. Melius was tussling playfully with her sister. Every time Kessa witnessed the dungeon keeper being affectionate or playful, it made her feel strange, like she was seeing something fantastic or forbidden. I've always enjoyed proving skeptics wrong, Equestria said, her determination returning.
And excelled at it.
Focusing on his wife, he asked,
Wouldn't you agree, Miss Decora?
Choosing to show humility for a change, Kessa agreed. Yes, and you'll do it again tomorrow. Glancing out the window, she saw Compton pacing back and forth impatiently, probably wearing a trough into their front walkway. I wouldn't keep the rhinoceros waiting much longer, she advised. Dr. Charlo Finesse opened her office door to see Kessa standing there ready for training. After she'd exchanged salutations with her trainee, Charlo fished, I see an unfamiliar fire behind your eyes today. That morning, replaying speedily through her mind, Kessa shrugged. She felt irritable, regretful, enthusiastic, and hopeful all at the same time. A difficult mix to process. Nothing she wanted to share with her trainer, however. Apparently she didn't need to. Charlo was perceptive and wise enough to deduce as much on her own. Channel all that into the pit. It's a great place to blow off steam. Head on down, and I'll meet you there in a couple of minutes. Marching down toward the double doors, Kessa refocused her mind on the task at hand. Distraction of any sort on a tight timeline wasn't a good idea. Once changed into her uniform, Kessa took a seat on the bridge to wait for Charlo. Half an hour later, she looked up to see Thomas striding toward her purposefully. Immediately curious and concerned, Kessa stood up.
Dr. Finesse is unable to make it for training this afternoon, he announced.
Is everything okay?
She is needed elsewhere,
Thomas said in a tone that warned Kessa not to inquire further. Are you here to take her place? Thomas looked at the mud distastefully.
I don't mud wrestle, little miss.
Not the type of dirt you prefer, Kessa teased. Thomas seemed too distracted to appreciate her dig. This mounted Kessa's growing concern. She'd discovered how much Thomas cared for Dr. Finesse, and vice versa. His lack of focus and humor was abnormal and cause for alarm. What in the 3 kingdoms of Nogard had occurred in the last half hour? Commonly, as cool and collected as a cucumber, Thomas wasn't a worrywart or the type to overreact. So whatever was going on was serious. Still, Kessa didn't press. But when several moments had passed, and Thomas had neither looked at nor spoken to her, she asked, "Should I just go home then?" Finally, his attention shifted to her. Combing a hand through his hair, he said, "No. Over the next couple of days, you'll be training at headquarters with me. I may not wrestle in the mud, but on dry land I can grapple with the best of them." Kessa knew this firsthand, having trained extensively with Thomas. She'd never managed to best him at anything. She was beginning to think she'd forever enjoy the challenge. After trailing him for 2 blocks, Kessa began to think keeping up with her long-legged companion, who seemed to be moving at lightning speed, was training enough. Out of breath, but unable to contain her worry any longer, Kessa hedged. "Thomas, what's going on? I've never seen you this preoccupied. I hope Dr. Finesse is okay." Stopping abruptly, he turned to face her. "Forgive me. I realize I'm not myself. However, I cannot divulge what's on my mind just now. Suffice it to say, Dr. Finesse is in no immediate danger."
"That doesn't really suffice in the slightest, Thomas. But I guess it's all I'll get. I am glad to know that Charlo is safe," Kessa said. Once they arrived at their headquarters training area, they began sparring. Initially, Kessa's volatile emotions gave her an edge over her preoccupied mentor, but not for long. Thomas centered himself and taught his pupil a thing or two. When the training session concluded, Kessa peeled herself off the floor, her face depicting the aches and pains inflicted during the exercise. "Gee, I'm starving," she admitted, while she rubbed her back and stretched. Thomas chuckled. "Understandable. You skipped lunch." Kessa's eyes bugged out. "How'd that happen?"
A smirk on his face, Thomas shrugged.
"Not easily. I've never known you to miss a meal."
Flabbergasted, Kessa agreed. "Nope, not that I can remember."
"It's almost dinner time, kid. You'll manage."
Her expression contradicting him, she flopped onto a crate, complaining, "I feel so weak, I can barely move." Rolling his eyes skyward, Thomas walked over to a small crate that was placed haphazardly on top of another larger one. Someone had dumped it there temporarily and forgotten about it. Prying the crate open with a crowbar, Thomas reached in and pulled out a fuzzy peach. He tossed it at Kessa. Seeming to overcome her aforementioned inability to move, she caught it and tore into it like a starved maniac.
"Same time tomorrow?"
Thomas asked. He seized the peach crate with intentions to put it in the pantry where it belonged.
"Another one,"
Kessa mumbled through her mouthful. Her mentor looked at her quizzically, as if he hadn't quite understood what she'd said. So she held her hand up expectantly and garbled a please. Resisting the urge to roll his eyes again, Thomas grabbed another peach and chucked it at her.
"Same time tomorrow?" He repeated his question.
"Yes, sir."
Kessa munched on her peach, licking the juice streaming down her hand as she rolled off the crate and started for the exit.
"Take care of yourself," Thomas commanded as she shambled off. "And kid."
He waited for her to turn and face him.
"Don't go looking for trouble."
Chuckling as much as her sore tummy muscles and mouthful would allow, Kessa replied with her usual nonchalance. "Where's the fun in that?"
"Just be calm and careful."
She saluted, took another bite of her peach, then left the building. Her pace was slow as she ambled home. Her mind was racing with theories on what had happened to Charlo, and whether that was the sole reason for Thomas's distraction. A horrible sight crashed into her with the force of a tidal wave as she neared the castle gate. She stood there, aghast, staring up at the ramparts where the heads of Augustus, Amberley, and their colleagues were skewered on spikes. It was a gruesome, over-the-top warning for thieves and would-be miscreants. Generally, when it came to thieves, poachers, and even some murderers, rehabilitation through strict punishment had always been the goal. It wasn't a perfect system by any means, but it was successful to some degree, since thieves and poachers were rare, before Cassius's rule anyway, and once released weren't likely to offend again. Once the shock had subsided, ire swelled in its place. She'd known several of these people, played with them as a youth. She'd never have imagined they'd meet such an end. Augustus was a thief and a rascal. But did he deserve to be beheaded? And Amberly? Amberly's story had bothered Kessa, who'd contemplated it since the night she'd clapped her in irons. If Cassius had ravaged and scarred her, why did he still want her brought in? Kessa had pegged him as the type that once his needs were sated, he couldn't care less about the woman afterward. So, what were his motives for sicking Kessa on her like a dog, as Amberly had put it? Hadn't she suffered enough? Apparently not. Memories of Augustus asking for her help to escape and her blatant refusal flashed in her mind. She'd believed he had a long prison sentence ahead, and deservedly so. If she'd known this was to be the result, she might have acted differently. No, Kessa didn't believe Augustus or his troop deserved such a vile end. Fueled by guilt, anger, and regret, her legs found unprecedented speed as she raced through the streets, beelining for the only place she could think of where she'd be justified in unleashing her full wrath.